For years, a struggling immigrant artist from Queens, New York, named Pei Shun Qian, was painting masterpieces in his garage. Masterpieces that turned out to be forgeries, work that fooled some of the most prestigious art galleries in New York and sold for millions of dollars. When the scandal finally broke in 2013, uncovered by a prominent Manhattan art dealer, the art world was stunned. But there was one uncomfortable truth lost in all the outrage. Qian's fakes were not technically inferior to the originals. In some cases, experts argued they were actually better executed. And that matters because it points to something larger than fraud. Qian himself has maintained he had no idea the paintings would be later sold as originals. By most accounts, he was simply doing what he had spent a lifetime doing, painting. Whatever his intent, the 73-year-old Qian, who had lived in the United States for 4 decades, was arguably an artist in his own right. And his story points to something deeper than art fraud. In Chinese cultural tradition, rooted in Confucian philosophy stretching back more than 2 millennia, imitation is not always seen as theft. It is apprenticeship. In that tradition, the highest compliment you can pay an idea is to carry it further than its creator did. Take calligraphy, for centuries the most prized art form in Chinese culture. The art historian Shen Fu perfectly captures the Chinese approach to knowledge, writing, quote, "Each calligrapher must absorb and command his tradition, then transcend it before achieving a personal style. To create one's own style while having derived it from the ancient masters has been the criterion for greatness throughout the centuries," end quote. In other words, innovation was not understood as creating something from nothing. According to the historian Shen Fu, to invent is to imitate. Quote, "Adopting the style of a master with the intention not to reproduce, but rather to create a new work, an invention," end quote. Now, of course, this isn't Chinese specific. All civilizations borrow from one another. This is how human progress works. The European Renaissance, for instance, drew heavily from Islamic scholars, who in turn preserved and expanded Greek and Roman knowledge during Europe's Dark Ages. China simply became exceptionally good at what comes next, the refinement and the improvement. Over time, it turned a skill into a strategic advantage, and nowhere is it more apparent today, not in art, but in China's military buildup. Consider what Beijing has done in 3 decades. Its navy went from a coastal defense force to the largest in the world by ship count. Its Air Force now flies stealth fighters that bear a striking resemblance to American 5th-generation designs. Its aircraft carrier program, once non-existent, now fields multiple vessels influenced heavily by Western naval architecture. Even Russia took notice. In the 1990s, Moscow sold China advanced Sukhoi fighter jets under strict licensing agreements. Years later, Russian officials accused Beijing of reverse engineering those aircraft and producing domestic versions without authorization. It's not just happening on the battlefield. According to former defense official Michael Brown, the People's Liberation Army employs hundreds of thousands of personnel who are entirely focused on acquiring foreign commercial and technological secrets. Chinese-linked venture capital firms have invested in American startups, gaining access to proprietary research, cutting-edge patents, and emerging technologies that later surface in Chinese defense applications. One semiconductor founder in Silicon Valley watched employees allegedly steal hard drives, flee to China, and then launch a competing company using his intellectual property. As the company's attorney put it, China was effectively beyond the reach of American courts. This stems from what analysts call civil-military fusion, the Chinese policy requiring private companies to support Chinese state and military objectives. It's very deeply entrenched in China. But here's the critical point, the one that should keep Pentagon planners up at night. China doesn't just copy. It takes what exists, it improves it, and it scales it with the full force of a national strategy. And now Beijing is attempting something that no military power has fully achieved before, an invisible net cast across the Western Pacific. What analysts describe as the transparent ocean strategy. This is a 5-layer surveillance network stretching from the sea floor to space, designed to make the Western Pacific visible to Beijing in real time. This is everything from satellites to smart buoys, autonomous underwater drones, seabed observatories. AI systems tying everything together. The individual pieces are not entirely new. The United States built vast undersea surveillance networks during the Cold War, but no country has yet attempted to integrate all of it from the seafloor to space into a single AI-driven surveillance network and strike network. That's the leap. Chinese and Russian forces demonstrated elements of this system during joint anti-submarine exercises near Vladivostok, sharing acoustic tracking data in real time. Chinese state media described the goal bluntly: to leave American submarines, what Beijing calls our Navy's black sharks, with nowhere to hide. Now, the doctrine behind this invisible net, what Beijing military theorists describe as the maritime adaptive kill web, is itself an evolution of American military thinking. The U.S. military pioneered the concept of the kill chain: find the target, track the target, strike the target. China studied the concept, identified its vulnerability, that a single broken link can collapse the entire chain, and built a distributed network instead, meaning multiple paths from the sensor to the shooter, networks that are designed to survive attack. One study from a Chinese naval academy described algorithms capable of calculating dozens of alternative strike routes for the same target in real time. China took our idea and made it better. This matters because the target of all this is Taiwan, China's #1 strategic priority. And China's moves in the Pacific are designed in no small part to ensure that if Beijing moves on Taiwan, American submarines cannot get close enough to stop it. Dozens of war games conducted in the Pentagon, by the Pentagon, by Congress, by outside think tanks have reached the same conclusions. In a conflict with China over Taiwan, the United States could burn through key long-range munitions within days, lose hundreds of aircraft, and face a U.S. defense industrial base that has little capacity to rapidly replace those losses. As retired Air Force Lieutenant General David Deptula put it, the 20 years post 9/11 really ought to be acknowledged as the era of the Great Distraction. We got too distracted from the real threats posed by China and Russia. Those 2 decades were consumed by wars launched in the aftermath of September 11th, first in Afghanistan and then in Iraq. Wars that were driven by the need for retribution and by a fixation on controlling energy resources in the Middle East. Whatever their justification at the time, they came at an extraordinary cost, not just in lives, but in strategic military focus. While America was fighting insurgents in Fallujah and Kandahar, China was busy building a navy. While America was spending nearly $14 trillion on the war on terror, Beijing was modernizing its Air Force, expanding its missile arsenal, quietly laying the groundwork for dominance in the Western Pacific. We were looking the wrong way, and now we're paying for it. China now accounts for roughly half of all global shipbuilding capacity. The United States accounts for less than 1%. America is currently producing just over 1 submarine a year. China's Navy has already surpassed the United States in total fleet size. Christian Brose, a former staff director of the Senate Armed Services Committee and the author of The Kill Chain, has been warning about this for years. Quote, we're in a window of maximum danger. We could throw $1 trillion a year at the defense budget now, and we're not going to get a meaningful increase in traditional military capabilities in the next 5 years. They cannot be produced, end quote. They cannot be produced. Brose argues that the United States needs to fundamentally rethink what military power looks like in the 21st century. Stop pouring money into legacy platforms, massive aircraft carriers, conventional warships that are increasingly vulnerable and painfully slow to replace, and instead scale autonomous systems aggressively: drone aircraft, unmanned surface vessels, underwater drones. But hardware is only part of the problem. The Pentagon's acquisition system, much of it built around the Cold War era, the procurement cycles, remain notoriously slow and poorly suited for the pace of modern technological competition. The defense expert Bill Greenwald put it bluntly to Politico: by clinging to those rigid Cold War planning models, we became the Soviet Union, bloated, bureaucratic, and incapable of moving at the speed that the moment demands, all of which makes what happened this week in Beijing especially troubling. Donald Trump just concluded a 2-day summit with Xi Jinping. Trump returned home touting commercial wins, including a Boeing deal that reportedly fell short of what analysts expected. But Beijing may have walked away with something far more valuable: increasing uncertainty about America's commitment to Taiwan. Secretary of State Marco Rubio stated clearly that U.S. policy on Taiwan had not changed. Hours later, Trump appeared to contradict him, first claiming that he discussed Taiwan arms sales with Xi, in his words, in great detail, and then literally moments later suggesting that he had not discussed the matter at all. There was likely little confusion in Beijing about what was said and what was heard. As the Wall Street Journal reported this week, Xi wants what Chinese officials call strategic stability, a predictable relationship in which Washington does not get in the way of Beijing's rise. Trump, meanwhile, is just trying to manage the chaos that he created and appears increasingly willing to trade long-term strategic clarity for short-term commercial optics. America's greatest superpower was never simply its military. It was also its alliances, NATO, NORAD, Five Eyes, the Pacific Partnerships. The real power in those relationships came from our credibility, from allies believing that America meant what it said. Trump has spent years weakening those relationships. You cannot build the coalition needed to counter China's rise while simultaneously making your word worthless to the allies you need. Beijing is not trying to win the moment. It's focused on the long game and shaping the coming century through discipline, industrial scale, and a military system designed to make the Western Pacific increasingly inhospitable to American power, one borrowed innovation at a time. As defense analyst Seth Jones recently observed, the American giant is, quote, lying in bed still. Its eyes are open, and it's recognizing there's a problem, but it's got to get out of bed, end quote. Joining me now is the political scientist and geopolitical risk expert, Mira Rapp-Hooper. Under President Biden, Hooper served as a senior director for East Asia and Oceania in the White House's National Security Council. Now she's a visiting fellow with the Center for Asia Policy Studies at the Brookings Institution. Mira, it's great to see you back again. Thank you for being with us.
It's good to see you, Ali.
Help me put some meat on these bones, because it has fundamentally not been the central issue that Americans have been thinking about strategically or militarily for a very long time. And while we've been not paying attention, China has made itself into the most formidable, or close to the most formidable military in the world, if not better.
Ali, I think you put it exactly right in your detailed introduction to this topic here. China has been laser focused for decades on modernizing its military in unprecedented ways, with the goal of increasingly being able to dominate the seas and the skies of the Western Pacific. And make no mistake, exactly as you put it, the main target of all of these strategic efforts is Taiwan, because China has designs on trying to force unification between Taiwan and mainland China, and has since 1949, when the Chinese Civil War took place. What we saw occur in Beijing this week when President Trump visited, however, was a break with decades of political precedents here in the United States on a bipartisan basis. While we have been worried about China's military modernization for a very long time and making efforts throughout the U.S. government to try to equip the U.S. military to be able to deter China and defend against it if it should attack an American ally or partner, beginning in Beijing and since he has left, President Trump has begun to signal very clearly that American policy towards Taiwan may be shifting. He's questioned whether the United States should continue arms sales to Taiwan. He's questioned whether that policy even remains good. And he's made very clear, as you put it, that he's willing to trade long-term American interests for short-term commercial gains.
He said, when referring to Taiwan, we don't know if we call it a country, and it's very far from here. But what was interesting is that this doesn't feel like a thought-out strategy, because Marco Rubio himself said, China says what it always says about Taiwan, and they know that our position hasn't changed. And then Donald Trump, on the plane back and on Fox News, went on and said, well, we don't know. We'll see. We're still thinking about this whole thing. That's a win for China. It may not be exactly what China wanted, a change in position for America, but the idea that Donald Trump has said after decades, we're thinking about it, is a win.
Absolutely. And it's a win because it injects massive uncertainty into Taiwanese politics and demoralizes the Taiwan people, making it increasingly likely that they will feel like they can't stand strong against Chinese pressure. But even if President Trump is not taking on the Taiwan issue using a strategic framework, you can bet, Ali, that Xi Jinping certainly is. From an analyst perspective, it's actually been fairly clear that since President President Trump launched his Liberation Day tariffs last April, Xi Jinping has been using trade negotiations between the U.S. and China to try to pressure American officials to downgrade the U.S. defense relationship with Taiwan. He's placed pressure on us to downgrade defense dialogues, to hold up security assistance, and has multiple times suggested that we should cancel our arms sales. So just one day after President Trump leaves Beijing, to hear him suggest that the United States might indeed be considering canceling arms sales to Taiwan, existential aid on which it relies to defend itself against China, suggests that Xi Jinping may indeed have succeeded in persuading President Trump of his position.
So people describe, I don't know if you ask 10 people on the street what they think China is in terms of its relationship to the United States. Some will say rival, some will say adversary, some will say competitor if you're in business. But unlike during the Cold War, where we didn't really trade with the countries behind the Iron Curtain, the relationship with China is substantially more complicated. We need our allies in order to put the necessary pressure on China as it relates to what they do economically and with our intellectual property. But we're isolating them. We're making Canada make deals with China that Canada didn't need to make, but they're worried about dealing with the United States, so they're diversifying.
No doubt about that, Ali. And to your point, when you ask the American people what aspects of China's behavior in the world worries them, they point more than anything else to China's intellectual property theft, China's unfair trade practices, and China's stealing of American technology, exactly as you laid out. So while political leadership here in Washington, where I am, are very concerned about Taiwan policy and the need of the United States to keep its commitments, if we want to be able to push back on China in all those other spaces, to blunt its advantages on critical minerals, to stop its theft of intellectual property, and to stand up against its unfair trade practices, there is no pathway forward unless we're working with American allies. That means allies in Asia, but it always also means allies in Europe, where, of course, the president has not been winning many friends in recent months. And I would say that Europeans are less engaged than they have been in many years on issues related to China because the transatlantic relationship itself is in such dire straits.
I was talking to Bobby Ghosh the other day, and he said rare earth minerals are China's Strait of Hormuz. Right. It's a thing we always knew they could use as a point of leverage against us, but hadn't really until we tested them. And then they did. And like the Strait of Hormuz, now America has to be in a position, as it relates to China's rare earths and other minerals, of pulling back on some of our demands to get what we need.
That's exactly right, Ali. I would actually posit that the years 2025 to 2026 have really been defined by choke points. First, China demonstrating that it could cut off critical mineral supplies to the world after President Trump put his tariffs in place. And then after the United States engaged in another war of choice against Iran, Iran throttling off its control of the Strait of Hormuz. China controls as many as 90% or more of the world's rare earths elements that are in production. For the United States to break China's stranglehold on these critical minerals, it's going to need to work with allies, and it's going to take 5 to 10 years to establish the resilience and the independence that we would need to rely only on our friends for these critical supplies. So again, there is no way out, no way through this counter-China strategy unless we're working with those critical allies.
And it requires a strategy. Mira, great to see you again. Mira Rapp-Hooper is a former senior director for East Asia and Oceania at the National Security Council under President Biden.
President Trump is back in Washington following his two-day summit with Chinese leader Xi Jinping. The visit was heavy on pageantry and flattery, but appears to have accomplished little in terms of policy, with no resolution on key issues like trade, the war in Iran, or Taiwan. In an interview with Fox last night, the president suggested that nothing has changed in the U.S. relationship with Taiwan, but warned against it formally declaring independence.
Should the people of Taiwan feel more or less secure after your meetings with President Xi?
Neutral. Neutral.
Has the policy changed at all?
No, nothing's changed.
U.S. policy?
No, nothing's changed. I will say this. I'm not looking to have somebody go independent and, we're supposed to travel 9,500 miles to fight a war. I'm not looking for that.
Meanwhile, the Art of the Deal president appears to have gotten little in the way of business deals either. He touted fantastic trade deals reached, although so far few details have been released. And the cohort of executives he brought with him also didn't have much to show for it so far. Instead, the president left Beijing appearing to choose agreeing with our adversary rather than defending the U.S. In a Truth Social post, the president referenced comments he suggested Xi made, saying that when she, quote, elegantly suggested that the U.S. was a declining nation, he was talking about his predecessor, Joe Biden's time in office. We're joined now by Lara Seligman, national security reporter for The Wall Street Journal, and Jenny Welch, chief geoeconomics analyst at Bloomberg Economics and former national security director for China and Taiwan under the Trump and Biden administrations. She was also a former advisor to Vice Presidents Pence and Harris on Asia. Ladies, thanks so much for joining us this morning. Lara, I want to start with you and talk about what you think Trump accomplished on this trip. Any tangible, meaty deliverables here?
Yeah. Well, I think we can safely say no, not really any tangibles. Look, they went to China. President Trump had two main goals in mind, and one was to open China up to U.S. businesses, and the other was to secure some kind of commitment from China to influence Iran on giving up its nukes and the control of the Strait of Hormuz. And Trump kind of came away with no clear wins on that front. There were no major business deals that were announced. There was no commitment from China to intervene in the Iran conflict.
Strait of Hormuz still closed.
Yes, exactly. On the other hand, it was a good look for President Xi. Just the fact of an American president showing up, coming to Beijing, kind of put the two leaders on equal footing.
I mean, if he got anything, if these business folks got anything, he'd be tweeting about it. There'd be something out there. He would have said it to Brett Baer. Something would have happened. Would have heard it. I want to play for you, Jenny, a montage of what President Trump said about how tough he was going to be on China and kind of where we are this week.
We can't continue to allow China to rape our country, and that's what they're doing. It's the greatest theft in the history of the world.
Such respect for China, the job you've done.
China has been ripping us off for many years. Somebody had to do it. I am the chosen one. Somebody had to do it. So I'm taking on China.
They want to continue to rip off America, and with me they can't rip.
The American and Chinese people share much in common. It's a special world with the two of us united and together.
Such respect for China, the job you've done. This was Wednesday in Beijing. Those two humans don't know each other, right? Like the Donald Trump who talked tough on China and the Donald Trump who's not operating. Presidents, when they're running, obviously they always sound tough on when it comes to foreign policy. But for him, it always felt different. It was visceral. He talked the language he used in that montage, and also the way that he spoke about China ripping us off felt different than other presidents.
No, and I think when you look back at the history of President Trump's political history, he was really the president that turned the page on China. When he campaigned for president in 2016, at that moment in time, the U.S. had its concerns about China, but he was really the one that launched out with this hawkish policy, first focused on trade, and then expanded to everything else. And that's true for when he came back into office last year. I think the turning point was the showdown last spring over trade and tariffs, and China playing this critical minerals trump card that continues to cast a real shadow over U.S. policy towards China and constrain what Washington can do.
But just because you're an expert on this, can you talk a little bit more about the critical minerals aspect of this? Because I feel like everyone's been sort of throwing it out there, but no one's gone into depth about really what that means, at least on television.
No. So
it's complicated.
We looked through all of U.S. industry and their dependencies on China, and we discovered about 4% of U.S. industries are dependent on critical minerals, the vast majority of which come from China. And even given all the steps that the Trump administration in its first term, the Biden administration, and now the second Trump administration have taken to de-risk from China, China's still dominant in those sectors and likely to be so for at least another decade. And I can't underscore enough how much of this weighs on Washington's calculus when it comes to things like contemplating taking more pressure to China, whether it be over Iran, whether it be over Taiwan, or whether it be on the trade front. And I think that's why you saw President Trump go back with relatively low and modest asks, if they were even asks of Beijing.
Lara, this is one of my little hobby horses. I mean, I love the pageantry of it. Use Twain. But the pageantry of a presidential visit to another country. The thing that jumped out at me when Air Force One arrived, it parked, all the people come out, the beast comes out, the door opens, the president comes down the stairs, then comes the son, the daughter-in-law, and then Elon Musk. Of all the people on that trip, Elon Musk is the one who was allowed to come down the front steps of the plane. Now, for those of you who might remember, Elon Musk is Elon Musk of Doge fame, who blew up famously with the president, leaving the government, reignited the Epstein files as a topic of national conversation, and yet there he is, front and center in China. Why?
Well, I think the big reason is that American businesses are front and center. So Elon Musk of Tesla, of SpaceX, I think the president wanted to underscore the importance of this moment for U.S. and Chinese relations, particularly through trade. Now, as we've said before, they kind of expected a couple more big deals, major announcements out of this. You know, agriculture, China buying more U.S. soybeans and beef, exactly. Even China buying more U.S. oil, so it wouldn't be so dependent on the Middle East and Iran. But the only thing we really saw come out of it was the Boeing deal for 200 airplanes, which is less than the 500 that were expected.
Do you even know what kind of planes? Because they make all sorts of planes.
Exactly.
Big planes.
Big planes. Very big. Very big planes.
I like a big plane myself.
President Trump is doubling down on a comment from Tuesday that probably gave every Republican strategist out there an ulcer. Here's a refresher.
When you're negotiating with Iran, Mr. President, to what extent are American financial situations motivating you to make a deal?
Not even a little bit. The only thing that matters when I'm talking about Iran, they can't have a nuclear weapon. I don't think about American financial situation. I don't think about anybody. I think about one thing. You cannot let Iran have a nuclear weapon. That's all.
Now here's what he said when he was asked about that comment last night on Fox.
That's right. That's a perfect statement. I'd make it again. When people hear me say it, everybody agrees. Short-term pain. It's going to be short-term pain. But the pain is much less than people thought.
That so-called perfect statement comes as a new CNN poll shows 70% disapprove of Trump's handling of the economy, 74% disapprove of his handling of inflation, and a whopping 79% disapprove of his handling of gas prices. Joining the conversation is Ron Insana, MS Now business analyst and writer of The Message of the Markets on Substack, and Mondaire Jones is still with us. So, Ron, yes, I'm not going to ask you about what a beautiful gift this was to Democrats. I mean, maybe I could. Yeah. But Trump's statement there was that, you know, it's going to be over soon. It's going to be better before you know it. How realistic is that prognostication?
It's not going to be over soon.
Okay.
It can't be over soon because it's going to take months to get oil. Even if the war were to stop tomorrow and they were going to start to engage wells and do everything else they need to do to get oil out of the Strait of Hormuz and around the world, that is a weeks to months process. Whether it's going to Japan, whether it's going to the California coast, it doesn't matter. It is not going to end soon, and it means that prices will be elevated for a period of time. And there is a point at which, if this were to carry on for a significantly longer period, like through July, then the production of oil starts to wind down in the Middle East. And restarting that is a very, very big problem, which means not just higher prices, but extraordinary supply disruptions around the world, more so elsewhere, Japan, Europe, but we'd still feel the effects as well.
So, go ahead.
No, I was going to ask you, Mondaire, about our colleague Alex Tabbitt has been speaking to Americans at the pump and getting their thoughts about those comments. Take a listen to what they've been saying.
He doesn't care about our situation. He doesn't. He's just here for pride and ego.
These prices are insane. I just wish gas prices would come down. That's killing me.
Only the rich are surviving right now, and the rest of us are getting more and more in debt.
Mothers with children are being homeless. People can't get food. He needs to do more, not only for the gas, but for his people.
So he chalks it up to short-term pain, but the reality of it is pain, and Americans are suffering, and he's completely out of touch with ordinary Americans. Is this going to be a campaign ad for Democrats to run on?
There has never been a president in the history of this country who has such disdain for everyday people. Yeah. I mean, to say what he said out loud. I mean, look, let's face it. We know that he thinks that, right? Like, he cares about the stock market, and in particular, apparently, about his own stock portfolio, given the hundreds of 3,700, excuse me, of trades that he made in individual stocks, largely, leading up to the Iran war that he started and apparently has lost on behalf of this country. Of course, Democrats are going to run on this, but they were already going to do that before those comments. I mean, he just made it even easier to make the case to people. But folks are feeling the pain at the pump. They're seeing it in the grocery stores, and they're struggling, right? I mean, you got a bunch of people who can't go on vacation anymore this upcoming Memorial Day weekend next weekend rather, because of how expensive he has made it to live, and people remember that. They know how it feels. It's not going to go away, to my friend's point over here. And what I also worry about is the way that, people are going to be able to retire in this country, right? Because we've already seen, the borrowing costs go up, right? So that means America is going to be further in debt. And that's not just with respect to the United States government. That's also corporations. It's going to be harder for them. And so when people look at their 401ks, I think that this is going to impact stocks as we get closer to November. And I think people who are paying attention to that kind of thing and who have those resources are also going to be upset, right? It's not just going to be lower income people. It's going to be people across the board in this country.
Ron, there's a new report from the Fed that shows economic well-being deteriorated among Black adults, young people, and those with low incomes. Of course, Mondare basically just spelled it out there. According to that report, 60% of Black Americans reported they were doing okay or comfortable in 2025, down from 65% in 24. Declines were also seen among adults ages 18 to 29, with 63% reporting financial stability, and those at the low end of the spectrum. I often hear economists say that, particularly when it comes to Black Americans, that their unemployment numbers, their economic well-being is usually like it is a warning sign. It is like the canary in the coal mine.
It's certainly one of them. And I know Catherine's former colleague, Heather Long, has written a lot about the so-called K-shaped economy, and it's getting more K-shaped. Those who are doing well are holding on very well, and those who are in middle and lower income brackets are getting absolutely hammered. If you're middle, you're just hanging on by the skin of your teeth. And if you're in the lower income bracket and you've got grocery prices, which last month had one of their biggest surges in quite a long time, gas prices obviously are moving up. Fuel prices, so jet fuel is doubling the price of in some cases, airline tickets. So it is a really regressive tax. Everything that we're seeing happen right now with respect to inflation is wildly regressive. What we're seeing on the employment side for specific groups is even worse. Generally speaking, Black unemployment runs about a percentage point higher than white unemployment, even through good cycles. And so this is just exacerbating that trend and making it even worse.
Mondare, hundreds of millions of dollars worth of trades were revealed in the most recent ethics filing on Donald Trump's behalf. Why has Congress not passed a law forcing presidents to either not trade while they're in office or have a true blind trust instead of just being managed by family members, like what is happening in Donald Trump's case?
Mike Johnson, I was going to say real quick, Mike Johnson addressed that earlier this week, and he had a soundbite where he said, look, the average member of Congress is making $174,000 a year, which is down in terms of real earnings. And then he said, they should be allowed to make a little bit of money because they're sacrificing so much of their life to serve the public.
They also get a $2,700 a month food stipend and travel stipend on
there you go.
Yeah, that only started recently, but I say it happened after I left. But
there's a 4-year window where something could have been done with respect to Trump.
First of all, the president gets paid a lot more than members of Congress.
Yeah.
And more importantly, it's because we've just never had a president who so brazenly engages in the kind of corruption that we see coming out of this White House. That is not an excuse. Congress should have done this a long time ago. I mean, no president should be able to trade in individual stocks, given the ability of the president to influence the market through apparently a tweet or a truth social, message.
Even across my career, every government elected official and appointed official was forced to divest their holdings in individual company stocks and go into a blind trust. This has been true. I remember James Baker, when he became Secretary of the Treasury in the Reagan administration, owned Texas American Bank shares. And he had to sell it and had to get rid of it, put the money in a trust. Everything had to go into T-bills. You can't.
Was that by law or just by kind of a norm?
I suspect it was more of a norm, but it was a
Yeah.
norm across the board that was widely accepted by everybody who was in
Jimmy
position.
Carter had to sell his peanut
Oh,
farm.
yeah.
Yes, he did.
You can't have a norm these days.
No.
Not with this government.
Unless you're watching Cheers.
All gone. Mondaire Jones and Ron Insana, great to have both of you guys with us.
Good morning. It's Saturday, May 16th. I want to start this hour with math. That's always a ratings winner. The math of the great gerrymandering war of 2026. You know this was triggered by Donald Trump. Republicans trying to rack up extra seats in Congress without having to actually earn any more votes to do so. On paper, I think it's fair to say Republicans are winning. Democrats stand to gain about 5 seats in California, 1 in Utah, believe it or not. But Republicans stand to gain as many as 14 seats across Florida, Missouri, North Carolina, Ohio, and Texas. And Republicans in 3 more states, Alabama, Louisiana, and South Carolina, are in the process of changing their maps to eliminate 3 more Democratic-held seats between them. If all of that succeeds, Republicans are looking at up to 15 net seats gained. There's a lot of ways to do this math, but think about it as 15 for now. But there's a lot more to this math than maps. For one, the national political environment. Donald Trump and his policies are not popular with the American people, and Republican candidates across the country are going to be on the hook for some of those policies. In a new Reuters Ipsos poll, 41% of registered voters say they'd vote for a Democrat in their district if the election were held today. Now, 41 sounds a little low given how unpopular Donald Trump is, but 41% is a 6-point advantage over Republicans. In that same poll, 36% of Americans approve of Donald Trump's job as president, 63% disapprove. So that's a 27-point deficit. There's also the arrogance of gerrymandering, of believing that voters are not going to care what is done to their districts. They will vote within the expectations of whomever drew or redrew the lines. In fact, one of the 5 Republicans in South Carolina who voted against a redistricting proposal, State Senate Majority Leader Shane Massey, warned that making that assumption could blow up in Republicans' faces.
Very candidly, you're going to motivate black turnout. And there will be repercussions for that. Trying to silence a voice is going to result in people wanting to hear that voice. That is especially the case here, where that minority voice consistently represents 40 to 45% of the electorate.
There will be repercussions, he says, meaning more people voting. And that would be a good outcome to all of this redistricting stuff. When Tennessee Republicans redrew their map, it sparked massive protests in the state house. Ditto in South Carolina and Alabama. Midterms are known to have lower turnout rates than general elections, but all the outrage over gerrymandering, in addition to other policy issues, may actually end out bringing up more voters in November. Massey also pointed out a mathematical reality of redistricting. When you try to turn 6 Republican seats into 7, to take South Carolina as example, those voters have to come from somewhere else.
Trying to go to 7-0, I think, is extremely risky from a political standpoint. I think at best you're going to get 6-1, and you may even go 5-2. I've told the press a number of times, I think if you get cute with this, you could end up in a 5-2 scenario. I don't want to go 5-2.
Right, so when you pull red voters into a reliably blue district, you make the district that the red voters came from less red. Now, to be sure, today's shifty map makers take great care to make sure that the redrawing of one district doesn't dilute another one too much. But in Texas, for example, a new map makes assumptions that may not hold up in November. Many of the changes are in South Texas, where Donald Trump made big gains with the Hispanic population in 2024. Those voters going to remain Republican? We may already know some of the answer to that, because Latinos turned out in massive numbers for the Democratic primary in Texas in March. As Politico reported then, quote, in 5 different rural majority Latino counties, more votes were cast in Tuesday's Democratic primary than for Kamala Harris in the 2024 presidential election. More Democrats came out to vote in a primary than they did to come out to vote for a presidential candidate. And the past shows us a candidate can win despite gerrymandering that's meant to draw them out of office. Take, for example, the Democratic Congresswoman Sharice Davids, who has represented Kansas's 3rd district since 2019. When she was elected, her district looked like this. It included parts of Kansas City and surrounding suburbs. Highly educated and relatively affluent. If there was a bluish area in the state, this was it. Before the 2022 elections, David's district was redrawn to look like this. Some Democratic voters were sliced from the top of the district, Kansas City. Rural counties with more Republican voters were grafted onto the bottom of the map. All in all, it accounted for about a 5-point shift in that district in favor of Republicans. In fact, when the new map was enacted, the Kansas City Star asked of Davids, is she doomed? And in that article, elections expert David Wasserman said, quote, almost everything that could go wrong for Democrats and redistricting has gone wrong. And you know what happened next? Sharice Davids won the election by 12 points. For more on this, I'm joined for the first time on this show and this network by Kabir Khanna. He is MS Now's brand new director of elections and analytics. He's running our elections coverage. He partners up with me for the work that we're going to do every single time there's an election. We're very glad to have him here. Welcome, Kabir. We're also joined by Celinda Lake, a Democratic political strategist who served as one of the lead pollsters for the Joe Biden campaign in 2020. She's also the president of Lake Research Partners. Welcome to both of you. Thank you for being with us this morning. Celinda, help us out with this, because we have been thinking about redistricting in terms of map making and map moving, and people will vote this way and people will vote that way. It eliminates the question of people shifting for political reasons, and it eliminates the question of people shifting because they're just mad about the way this is happening.
That's right. Well, first of all, I will say that that D+6 map that you had, the 6-point advantage, translates into 32 states. So even if they take 32 seats, so even if they take 12 away from us, we still pick up 20 seats in a year where people are so dissatisfied. But you're not going to convince these rural voters that tariffs are working for them when 55% of them say, I have personally been hurt by the tariffs. You're not going to convince the white independent male that diesel prices, when they're hitting $5, $6, $7, are not out of range and really hurting their families. You're not going to convince the woman who can't get to the hospital now because the rural hospital is closed that the health care plan for the Republicans, or lack of a plan, was a good idea. So I think there's going to be votes for change, and I think that South Carolina politician was right. They may have really overshot this, and rather than dealing with the problems that they had as a party and the problems they have in the president and policy, they chose to manipulate maps, and the voters are going to get it.
And Kabir, I think you probably share a lot of those views, and I want to get your analysis on it. However, I also want to point out to people that when they look at the popularity versus unpopularity of Donald Trump, it doesn't translate to Congress. It doesn't translate into 67% of people say they'll vote Democratic for Congress and 33% say they won't. Tell me a little about that.
Sure. So this is a pattern you'll often see in midterm years. You know, Donald Trump's approval rating is around 40% in the polling. You showed one poll that had the Democrats up 6 points on the generic ballot. There are still a lot of people who are undecided. So actually, as we approach the fall, both parties' vote shares might increase as more people get activated and engage with political campaigns. In addition, a lot of polling right now is talking about registered voters. And what we've seen in many elections since 2024 is that likely voters, or the people who actually turn out to vote, are more Democratic this year. So when you move from registered voters to likely voters, it's very possible that that edge may grow even more. That said, at the end of the day, there are going to be people who disapprove of the job Donald Trump is doing who still won't bring themselves to vote for a Democrat. So, you know, this is a dynamic that we have to keep an eye on throughout the year. And what Democrats are going to try to do is turn this election into a referendum on Donald Trump and his policies, which are relatively unpopular.
So, Linda, one of the things that this is happening very aggressively in the South, where there are still remnants of Jim Crow, the runoff system, the fact that you got to get 50% of the vote. These are actually all things that were established to sort of prevent black people from getting elected. What do you make of Massey's comments where he said this could come back to bite us as Republicans because you're going to get a whole bunch of black people who may not have been as enthused about going out to vote in a midterm election who are going to say, you know what, this is the Voting Rights Act. This is what my grandparents fought for and my parents fought for in the civil rights movement. We're not giving this up.
Right. I think and one of the things that we need to do as a party is get every single young person out and every single African American out. And we've got a lot of wind behind our sails in doing that. There were in 2024 over 9 million skippers on the Democratic side in battleground states, not just southern states, but battleground states. Those voters are coming out. They are very motivated, and the specials have shown the Democratic turnout is at record high. And that's when schools aren't in, and it's during the summer, and it's when it's a primary, not a general. So watch for record high turnout, and if the Democrats do anything, we have to get the young people out, and we have to get African Americans out. And the Republicans just weaponized a major, major tool for us to do that.
Kabir, help me understand, because Celinda has talked about tariffs, which refer to agriculture for farmers, and reciprocal tariffs. There's the cost of diesel. All the reasons why people are, from an issues perspective, going to be frustrated with Donald Trump and Republicans. How much of that is a motivating factor that'll help Democrats, and how much are the other issues? The fact that there's a war in Iran that people don't like, that Donald Trump is underwater in terms of how he executes on immigration and affordability. Talk to me about the overlap between issues and voting rights.
Yeah, so my sense or my read of the recent polling on this is that Donald Trump's main policies in the second term are widely unpopular. And that starts with the fact that he ran a campaign in which he promised to lower the prices of things. And just the opposite has happened. So I think widespread economic discontent and dissatisfaction with the administration's perceived lack of focus on inflation at the expense of other things like a war abroad is really driving his underwater approval ratings. So that's kind of the background. And then on top of that, I think the point you made is correct, which is that as voters perceive the rules of the game being changed and see that they're being drawn into other districts, I do think that will add fuel to the fire in terms of engaging people and driving turnout. It's a long-standing dynamic in midterm years that the party out of power tends to be more motivated to show up, and you'll see that differential turnout. Well, it's very possible that that gap is going to get even wider as we get into the fall. I will note one caveat, however. So when it comes to South Carolina, for example, and many of the other maps that are being redrawn, the map makers are trying to draw them in a way that they will be robust to this kind of engagement. So most of the districts in South Carolina, for example, were carried by Donald Trump by double-digit margins. So if that state legislator is really worried that those seats might flip anyways, he is anticipating a massive wave and a massive groundswell and shift to the left this year. We'll have to see how that materializes.
Celinda, let me ask you about the places where in the last year we have seen in special elections and in off-year elections, Democrats have outperformed. They either win by more or they lose by less. In many cases, those win by more or lose by less have been candidates who do not represent the traditional face of the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party itself is putting a lot of effort and backing into incumbents and traditional candidates who are facing challengers. Some might argue that this is a progressive versus moderate fight. I tend to argue that it's a fighters versus folders fight. The Democratic Party is still controlled by folders.
Well, I think that there are two things. Number one, you can't beat something with nothing. So the Democrats have to be much more aggressive about offering an alternative. I think the Congressional Progressive Caucus did that with their contract with voters, and it's very, very, very popular. People want action from day one. They want somebody like Mikey Sherrill, who stopped in the middle of her inauguration speech, signed the cap on utilities, and then continued with her speech. She took action day one. And then I think we need to be talking much more about healthcare. It's our best issue by far, and it links some of the most unpopular policies, the cuts in Medicaid, and a war that is costing $2 billion plus a day. That money could fully fund healthcare, and healthcare is getting out of range for Americans. And then you have AI denying insurance claims. Who's going to take on the insurance companies? It's going to be the Democrats. So we have to aggressively offer something. But I think we have a tremendous field of candidates. Lots of new faces. My favorite group is the Hellcats, the women veterans who formed together in the Hellcats, tough as nails, won our gubernatorial races in Virginia and New Jersey, and are running in record numbers in the congressional races. So independent of the party brand, which has major problems, these candidate brands are very exciting.
I appreciate you kicking us off this morning. We appreciate your analysis. Kabir Khanna is MS Now's Director of Elections and Analytics. Celinda Lake is a Democratic strategist and the president of Lake Research Partners. Thank you to both of you this morning.
A new phase of the Jeffrey Epstein investigation. That is what House Oversight Committee Democrats say they are launching following a hearing this week with Epstein survivors and their families in Palm Beach, Florida, not far from Epstein's former home where he sexually abused girls.
You guys have to figure out how to make justice, not me. And you can't give me justice. You keep on saying this is the worst case in the United States, but it's not. It's the worst case in the world. This never happened to me in other places, and I traveled as a model all over the world.
Jeffrey Epstein destroyed so many of our lives, and Ghislaine Maxwell helped him do it.
I was trafficked to Jeffrey. I had 2 recruiters. One was a late teen, and the other was only 15 years old, just trying to escape her own abuse.
Joining me now, Virginia Congressman Suhas Subramaniam. He serves on the Oversight, Science, and Ethics Committees. Look, I'll be candid. I watched you along with me as those women were testifying. We're shaking our head, almost in disbelief that we're dealing with this. But you have this hearing, which is the first time some of these survivors, particularly that first one, Rosa, have come forward. What new did you learn from their testimony?
One, for me personally, I think many of the other committee members, it reminded us of why this investigation is so important. One, because, Jeffrey Epstein, Ghislaine Maxwell, really just, ruined the lives of so many girls in Palm Beach and across the world. And Palm Beach is where it started, which is why we had that hearing. But, the damage that it did. And second, how the government, whether it's law enforcement or the justice system, like over and over again, they disappointed and undermined these survivors when they tried to share their stories, when they tried to name names. They were almost on the side of perpetrators at times. And so it reminded us why we're doing this investigation, why people don't trust government, and why we need to continue pushing forward.
Ranking Member Robert Garcia released a new report claiming the non-prosecution agreement negotiated by former Florida U.S. Attorney Alex Acosta, that's what allowed Epstein to, quote, continue and expand his trafficking operation. So what is in this report that the public hasn't seen before?
We interviewed Alex Acosta as well, and, he blamed everyone else but himself. But the reality is there's people like Alex Acosta who made Jeffrey Epstein, gave him the ability to continue his crimes. And we're interviewing other people, too, who are involved in Epstein's enterprises or who are in the Epstein files. And we're going to continue this investigation. The Republicans have shut down the Oversight Committee. They won't let us have official hearings anymore because they're afraid we'll try to subpoena more Epstein-related witnesses. And they're also trying to shut down the investigation altogether, saying that there's nothing to see here. And so is the DOJ as well. So, we are trying to shine light on everything that is out there and put out reports to the people about what we heard from the witnesses.
Yeah, clearly this is not deterring Democrats because that report is the first of many that Oversight Democrats say they will release as part of a new phase in the Epstein investigation. So what can we expect in this new phase, new stage of the probe?
Well, we're talking to people who are very close with Jeffrey Epstein. And so we're also talking to the prison guard who was looking after Epstein when he committed suicide. Some people have questions about whether that was a suicide or how he was able to commit suicide under those circumstances, given that he was under essentially a suicide watch. And then we have people like Bill Gates coming in to answer questions that the American people have on why they were involved, how they were involved too. And so we are going to continue to push for answers, and we're going to continue to push for the release of the 2.5 million files, many of whom the survivors have brought up themselves as being problematic. They were looking for files themselves with their own statements. And so we're going to keep pushing forward in this investigation, and we're not going to wait until we're in the majority in Congress to get some answers.
Well, in fact, oversight Republicans have scheduled this Thursday interview coming up with Sarah Kellen, who was a top assistant to Epstein and who claims he abused her. Now, Kellen was one of 4 women named as possible co-conspirators in that 2007 Florida agreement, granting all of them immunity. The Epstein files show Manhattan prosecutors discussed bringing a witness tampering charge against Kellen, and she was also accused in numerous civil lawsuits of scheduling Epstein massages with young girls. So now the committee wrestles with whether women like her were victims of Epstein, whether they're co-conspirators or both. How will the committee navigate this when questioning her?
Well, one thing that the survivors brought up at our hearing in Palm Beach is that, many of them were forced to try to recruit other women too, and so it put them in a very difficult position. And then too, they brought up how their identity was revealed in the Epstein files, as well as personal information about them too. Sarah Kellen comes up a lot. She was essentially a gatekeeper for Epstein. She was paramount in making him available to be able to do these heinous crimes. She knew all about his crimes. So at the very least, we'd love to know what Sarah Kellen knows. We'd love to know if Sarah Kellen can explain to us how Jeffrey Epstein was able to get away with these crimes. And I know it's a very difficult situation, so I want to hear how she was victimized too. But certainly we want to protect all the survivors, but Sarah Kellen was very unique in that she was essentially an executive assistant, a scheduler, and an operator for a lot of Jeffrey Epstein's activities.
So listening to that, are you leaning more towards a co-conspirator for her, for this one person?
From what I've seen in the files, she's more co-conspirator to me than anything else because of how involved she was. But to me, I want to hear what she knows. In the end, I would like to solve the bigger problem, which is how Jeffrey Epstein was able to get away with these crimes, why people are still covering up for the people involved with Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell, why a pardon for Ghislaine Maxwell is even being discussed publicly, given what a monster she has been. And so Sarah Kellen may have some key answers that will help us in this investigation.
Okay. Congressman Suhas Subramaniam, it's good to see you again, sir. Thank you so much.